Unchecked. Wow, episode 152 of the A2 show. Amazing. Yeah.
This is a good one. This is a big one.
Yes.
Because today we are joined by none other than Miss Clarissa Ward. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the world. Let the world know who you are and what you do.
Hi, guys. Thank you very much for having me on. I am CNN's chief international correspondent.
All right. Awesome.
Amazing.
Cool.
That's
Yeah,
very simple, but very powerful
Very-
because there's a lot I want to ask and jump into. So
Let's
let's get
jump
right
into
into
it.
the news.
Can you tell us about the places you've been?
So some of the places I've been, well, I lived in New York and London as a kid. And then after I finished college, I lived in Moscow, Beijing, Baghdad, Beirut. Yeah. And then I came
wow.
back to London. But obviously I've traveled also Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Afghanistan, Jordan, Georgia. I mean, I've been to a lot of countries.
You've
lot
been
of
to
places.
places. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
I bet your passport is like always full. But here's the question that I want to know.
Yeah.
So, what was the year you've been in, like the Arabian Peninsula or the Arabian countries?
Well, I've been traveling in the Middle East from 2005 to present day, really.
2005. So that was like a really, really hard time in Baghdad, right?
Yeah.
In Iraq at the time.
Yeah.
So you were there because like I remember I was like 6 at the time, but I remember watching the news back then and like for some reason reporters weren't treated, I think, I don't know how to say the word, but like it was very sketchy and very hard.
It was extremely difficult and dangerous. And,
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons. I went to Baghdad for the first time 2 years after the US invaded Iraq. And any optimism that there was around the invasion from some people in Iraq quickly disintegrated when it became clear that the situation was chaotic, that the US was completely underprepared for the day after. And there was an insurgency gathering steam. Journalists, as you point out, were a target because anyone who was affiliated or associated with the US was considered to be a legitimate target. But the primary thing that I just experienced being there was the heartbreak of the Iraqi people who had already endured so much.
Yeah, they did.
And now we're plunged into this absolute quagmire with no end in sight. And I just think it was a really, really awful time for a lot of people.
It was, and especially around the time of the trial of Saddam Hussein, who was captured, I think, by the U.S. forces and was handed over to the Iraqi authorities. So, did you have any coverage during that time?
Yeah, so I started out as a producer and I kept begging my bosses to let me go in front of the camera. And finally, in 2006, they agreed to let me do that. And they said, you can go for your first time as a reporter for 6 weeks, but you have to go for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve, which are obviously like 3 big holidays for my family and I. But of course, I jumped at the chance. And then I guess it was just a few days after Christmas that Saddam Hussein was executed. And they did it like that. Like, I mean, obviously it had been expected to happen at some point, but they did it really quickly. There were no senior correspondents able to get in because they were all on their vacation. So for me, it was like baptism by fire. I spent 36 hours in the live shot position, really just learning how to be a live reporter and how to do this job. And it was surreal. It was like a real moment in history. And it was my first real moment being on the news.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. So, were you there in Kazmia, Iraq, when they, hung him, or were you?
I was in our Baghdad bureau, which
I see.
because Baghdad was so dangerous at that time, we basically lived in these compounds. And one of my biggest frustrations with the way we covered the war was that we could only tell it either from these bunkers where we were living or by going out with the US military, which was an important part of the story. But we weren't telling the story of the Iraqi people.
Yeah.
And that was making me crazy. Even after Saddam was executed, you wanted to be out on the street talking to Iraqis. How do you feel about this? This is the end of an era. What does this mean? But you couldn't. You could send out your local cameraman to do that, but it was still too dangerous for us to go out and do that. And I found that really frustrating as a journalist. I felt there was so much of the story that we weren't telling.
Oh,
Interesting.
what do you mean, like
So
the Iraqi people, as opposed to like if you're with the military, you can really um, interview
Well,
people on the
because
street?
when you're with in the US military, right? I mean, you have to keep in mind, like, it was very tense in Iraq at that stage. So the US military would have these cordial relations with some of the, like, the local sheikhs or Iraqi military personnel,
mm,
but they couldn't really just like walk around and shoot the breeze with people,
Yeah.
right? They had to have a very specific focus to any mission they did outside the wire, which means when you're kind of leaving your compound. And that meant that they really were limited in the perspective they were able to get and the way they were able to engage. And that meant that we were limited. So when I was spending time with the US military, it was more I was covering like operations they were doing. I was covering the counterinsurgency tactics
Yes.
that they were trying to implement, as opposed to
Normal
sitting
people.
down with ordinary Iraqis whose lives have been turned upside down and getting a better sense of what is your life like now.
Wow.
wow.
And when you're doing international correspondence news, that just reflects the people there, right? So if you're just doing news on the extremists and the counterinsurgents, that's all we hear about. But if you're not interviewing
And you're
actual
not
people,
getting,
you're
you're
missing out.
totally right. And so, if you like, people who watch a lot of my work know that I am almost more interested in the people in the middle. Like, that's who I want to talk to. I want to talk to the ordinary people who are like surrounded by the craziness and are trying to like protect their children and go about their daily lives.
Yeah.
I'll never forget being in Gaza once. And there was an Israeli incursion into Gaza. It was after the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier. And I remember this woman coming out of her house, a Palestinian woman, and she went and she picked up a roadside bomb, okay, that Hamas had planted for Israeli tanks to hit. And these Hamas guys run up to her and they're like, "What are you doing? Hajja, like, put it down. It's not for you. It's for the Zionists. It's not for you." And she just was like, "You know what? I don't care who it's for. I don't want it in my neighborhood. I
Yeah.
don't want it anywhere near the ordinary people who are living here." And to me, I was like, now that woman is a hero. That is a mukawama. Yeah. That's like some serious resistance right
Okay,
there.
you
And
sent
those are
some
the
chills down my
stories that
spine. You
I mean,
really
for both
did.
of us, because I mean, we both are from
Yeah.
the region, and for me, especially coming from Lebanon, I know that like there are a lot of normal people that just want to live a normal life, right? And
of course.
and there are a lot of extremists that are mixing the whole pot and making it
Pretty
hard for
much.
us to live a normal life. I remember like being in high school, and I had some friends started coming from Syria. A lot of Syrian kids started joining our school, and I didn't know too much about the situation that was happening in Syria. I just knew that like these regular people were joining our class. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about
Mm.
what happened. What's the
Yeah.
truth
So
behind Syria?
I think like I've covered a lot of war, but there's
Mhm.
always going to be one war that you cover that breaks your heart and that grabs your heart and won't let go. And for me, that was Syria, because it was such a David and Goliath situation in Syria
Mhm.
where, like, it started out as a peaceful uprising. Even when it morphed in the early days to an armed uprising, you were talking about like teachers and carpenters with AK-47s who were fighting against a pretty sophisticated army with an air force and the full backing of
Of
some
international
serious
countries.
international superpowers.
Yep.
So you already had this dynamic where it was like, and I would find it hard as a journalist not to say sometimes to the rebels, like, "Are you crazy? Why are you going out there and fighting them? You don't even have two-way radios. Like, you're in way over your head here."
Mm.
And then the other thing that was so striking about Syria for me was that I had never really covered a conflict where civilians were being targeted so ruthlessly, where it was literally like bombing hospitals, bombing schools, using chemical weapons, using nerve agents and blistering agents against
But
ordinary
that's a war
people.
crime, is that not?
Oh, I mean, there's been so many war crimes committed in Syria that I really think people have lost track. And that's part of the problem, is that at a certain point, people just start to become desensitized to it. And they're like, all they can say is, oh, that's terrible. But if they can't think of a solution, they don't really know what to do about it. So, and I wish that people understood that, like, speaking to your point, Ali, about, like, Syrian kids coming to your class and stuff, like, I just wish that people understood more broadly, and especially in the West, that, like, no Syrian wants to leave their beautiful home in Aleppo and all their friends who they grew up with and stuff, so that they can, like, steal your resources and take advantage of your privileges. They'd rather be in Aleppo, okay? But they can't. And the only chance they have of survival and of a future for their kid is to get out. And I feel like sometimes we have such a negative, almost mean-spirited view of refugees. And I think it's born out of this misunderstanding that somehow refugees are trying to game the system, as opposed to, no, these people just had their world blown up and torn apart. And this is the best hope they have for giving their kids a future.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think there's also another point where, especially in the case of Syria, now there are generations of kids who grew up without a home. Now, as of now, speaking of 2020 today, right? Generations. And this can affect them mentally. When you grow up, you have no home, no country to go to, no one's accepting you. I mean, it doesn't take any kind of doctor or psychiatrist to understand that this can mentally break you down. So what do you think is the future looking like for these countries that have been war torn, like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan? Like, is there hope? Or
I mean, look, I am fundamentally an optimistic person, so I'm always going to say there's hope. Because to me, the minute you say there isn't hope, then you get into this dangerous trap of being like, well, then it's okay not to do anything because there's no hope, right? And I don't subscribe to that. And I think particularly in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan, given that the U.S. invaded these countries, there is an obligation to try to leave it in a better state than you entered it in. So I think that, look, there's definitely bright spots. I think Afghanistan is facing some huge challenges, and I think Syria is going to face real challenges. I think you're absolutely right, Adi. You're looking at, like, this lost generation, basically. Like, these kids didn't go to school. These kids saw their friends and loved ones killed. These kids saw babies killed. They know nothing but violence. Their only saviors often were extremists, right? Who put all sorts of ideas in their head. So they are living in a really challenging environment right now, because even if they want to change their lives, even if they want to do something different than, carry a gun, what can they do? What are they qualified to do? What are their opportunities in Syria, in rebel held, in the one rebel held area there is left? And so I don't want to try to downplay the damage that's been done, and I don't want to make it sound rosy or anything like that. But I still
you just
think
want
it's
to display it as it is, basically.
yeah. But,
what it
and I
is.
also want us to, like, I don't want us to be so pessimistic that we say it's okay to give up on these people, because there's still a lot of potential there. And with the right opportunities and the right investment, there's, Syrian people are capable of doing tremendous things. They just need the world not to give up on them.
Amazing. Are
I
there
mean, though, it's looking kind of hard, I'll be honest.
I know.
For the
Yeah.
world.
No,
But
it
are there
is.
normal
It is.
places? Are there normal people, like normal functioning areas within Syria right now?
I mean, define normal functioning. Like, the regime is now in control of 2/3 of the country, right? And there's less fighting right now than at any stage during the conflict, but there's still heavy sanctions. There's terrible corruption. I don't think anywhere in Syria looks normal right now. You have the added stress of COVID as well. There are places where it's not dangerous right now in terms of bombs falling, but normal, no.
Wow. I mean, the bombs falling part, like, I live in Irbid, which is in Jordan, right? And I'm pretty sure you've heard of that. We're
Yep.
15 minutes away from Daraa, which is the most southern
Mm-hmm.
Syrian town. Now, I think it was 2 years or 3 years ago when the Russian planes were like airstriking Dala. I'm not too sure if it was 2 or 3 years, but I felt the effects of the bomb in my apartment in Erbil.
Wow.
Like it's crazy. Like I remember waking up that night to the whole like apartment shaking, and I was like, and I'm 15 minutes car ride away from that. So what
Yeah.
about the people that are right under those? Like
Yeah.
it's crazy.
No,
So
it's
from here,
pretty intense.
I want to segue into what was the most dangerous situation you were ever put in getting into the. I know you guys ask this a lot, but
No,
I
it's not
really
that.
wanna,
It's not that. I mean, there's been a few. There's
Yeah.
been a
all right,
few.
let's talk about them.
Well, when I was living in Baghdad, we lived in a place called the Palestine Hotel initially, and the Palestine Hotel was next to another hotel called the Sheraton, and the U.S. military had some personnel in the Sheraton, and then the Palestine was us, the Associated Press, and like maybe Al Hara, which was a U.S. sponsored news channel. So we came under attack. It was a triple suicide car bombing. The first car bomb blew up. It was during Ramadan as well, and it was just after iftar. And so the first suicide bomber blew himself up at, like, we have these blast walls around the compound, and he sort of made a hole in the blast wall by blowing himself up. And then the second bomber went in and blew himself up at the second blast wall to make an even bigger hole. And then the third was a cement mixer truck filled with explosives. We were already, after the first two bombings, thinking we were going to die. Honestly, like, all the windows had blown in, the doors had come off their handles, like, because it's a forceful blast and not far from where we were. And we understood that we were under attack. And so we were trying to go into this like kind of like a panic room with metal doors that you just, I mean, it's never a good scenario if you end up in there, because it basically
having a panic room to begin with is not a good.
Yeah, it's not a good scenario. And then the third, this big cement mixer truck basically got stuck on some razor wire. And so he was lurching back and forth, and our security guys were on the balcony watching, and he was lurching back and forth trying to push the axle of the car over the razor wire. But he also understood that someone from the US military in the Sheraton Hotel was going to kill him like any moment, right? Sort of wonder why it hadn't already happened, but that's another story. And so he just blew himself up because he was like, I got to do it now, or they're going to shoot me before I get blown up. So he blew himself up, and it was just massive blast. And if he had gone past the razor wire and got right up to the entrance of the hotel, I'm sure we would all be dead. But because it was one of these like crazy old like 1980s structures, it was like a cement box basically. And and he was far enough away that none of us were killed. I mean, there was a lot of damage to the hotel. He obviously was killed, and it was very surreal to like come down afterwards, and there's like little parts of him all over the place, and you just like, what a waste. Like, what, I mean, wow, what, it's really hard to get your head around something like that.
Yeah, it really is.
So that was probably one of the most dangerous. And then I had a few close calls in Syria too. Once we got stuck in a gun battle, and then the rebels retreated, which meant we were on the wrong side of the front line, and we were running to try and get out of danger. And I was wearing an abaya, and it was like very muddy, and I was wearing a bulletproof vest, and I couldn't run through the mud. And the only thing to take shelter behind were these olive trees, which are like skinny. And or like the bullets were.
I've seen olive trees. I don't know what you were thinking going by.
Yeah.
But at the heat of the moment, I don't blame you, honestly.
I mean, you take whatever cover you can.
Pretty much,
an olive tree is not optimal. So that was also very, very scary. But I genuinely really try to avoid, I don't like being in and I think sometimes we have a tendency to glamorize the lifestyle of the war correspondent. And I mean, you guys can probably relate to this if you've spent time in the Middle East. You understand, like, there's nothing exciting about bombs. Okay. They really suck.
They do.
They're awful. They're petrifying. You don't want to be anywhere near one. You don't want anyone you care. You don't want anyone to be near one. So,
Yeah.
Unless you're
um,
crazy or a psychopath.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some people maybe do get kind of a thrill from being in really dangerous situations. I'm not one of those people. I get just really scared and want
I'm
to
not
leave.
too. I don't like it.
So then why do you do it if it's
Yeah.
when these
So
areas are so dangerous?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I first of all, the more I do it and the more experience I get, I really do try to avoid those frontline
Okay.
situations where
Mhm,
I'm in active, like kinetic, gun battle or something.
mhm.
And then I do it because somebody has to tell these stories. And I feel like we need to tell them with some humanity and with like respect for the people and respect for the culture and the places and empathy and compassion. And I don't know. I feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Uh,
if
Thank you.
that's a true
First of
calling,
all, yeah.
then
Uh,
yeah, that's
we've
great.
had like people from China, Uyghur. We've had people from Yemen, from Belarus, and every time we have people talk about these like hot topics, they're always like, should I show my face on camera? Should I not?
Yeah,
Especially in
Yes.
the Uyghur situation, or especially in Yemen, the guy wasn't even allowed to show his face on
pretty
camera.
much.
That
Yeah,
he,
we even had like shout out to Lance Corporal Jason, who was in the UK military.
Mhm.
He wasn't allowed to show his face, but he's been on tours and he's seen war firsthand, right?
Mm.
So
How did you guys meet each other?
me and him, we grew up with
Grew up,
each other.
in
He
Kuwait,
Ali used to live in Kuwait. We went to the same middle
middle school
school,
or something.
but then he split, went to Lebanon.
I
I
went to
stayed in
Lebanon.
Kuwait because that's where I'm from. But yeah,
Mhm.
now this is a question. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. But I'm very interested in this kind of topic, so I'll
Mm.
ask. Uh, Seeing all these different things like explosions, kills, suicide bombings, and like actual war-torn countries, has it taken any toll on your mental health?
Oh, for sure. I mean, well, first of all, you guys should read my book and order it and tell your
Yeah, shout out.
What,
listeners.
what
Oh,
Okay, I got
word.
it. Check it.
you
There
can
you
get it.
go.
Link in
Got
the
the photo.
description below. You guys should.
Cover. Yeah.
So I talk a little bit about this in my book, and it's a hard thing to talk about because for whatever reason, it's still a taboo among journalists. And
Mm,
let's be very clear about this. If you were someone who was constantly seeing terrible things and it didn't take any toll on you,
you're either psychopathic or lying.
thank you. Like,
Mhm.
that's not normal. That's
Yeah,
Yeah,
not
weird.
normal.
It's
pretty
more
much.
normal and more emotionally mature to be like, wow, this
Mhm.
is hard. Now, the thing that people don't understand about witnessing trauma and how that can take a toll emotionally is that when you see it in the movies, it's like, I went to the war zone, I saw the dead child, I came back, I had nightmares, I cried a lot, I felt sad, right? And if that's the way it happens in that kind of linear chronological way,
Mm,
that makes it easier because you're like, oh, I know why I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling sad about the dead baby, and I had a nightmare yesterday, and this all kind of makes sense, and I'm processing it. My experience with covering war has been, you're in the field, in the war zone, you see the dead child. It's shocking, it's awful, but you really have to be just focused on what you're doing and getting your material together and blah, blah, blah. And so you just keep powering through it, powering through it. Then you leave the country and you go home and you're with your friends and you feel a little bit like a fish out of water. Like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Like, do I belong here?
Mhm.
And then you're spending time with your family, your loved ones, your husband, whatever it might be. And you're kind of feeling not really in tune with
mm,
them, and you don't really feel connected to your life and you feel kind of numb, but you're not sad. That's not the right word. You're detached, you're numb, and you're irritable, and you're like, why am I irritable? Why do I feel sad? Why do I feel detached? And so it's not like, oh, wait, this is because of that. You're just thinking, why am I in a really bad mood all the
Okay.
time?
Is that
Right?
yeah.
PTSD? Right?
I
Like
mean,
Would it be?
look, there's different
variation. Mhm.
sort of levels of like PTSD and what
Mm,
rises to the level of being PTSD and what is also just decompressing from like an enormously stressful situation.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, look, PTSD at its most acute is like very intense. I've never experienced anything like that where you literally are having panic attacks and recurring nightmares, and you might have severe substance abuse issues, for example.
Mm.
There are all sorts of tells, let's say.
Hmm.
For me, the thing I struggled with was just feeling a little bit detached from my life, feeling like I didn't really want to be me anymore, as in my normal life. And what I learned is that you have to be able to embrace joy and love and normalcy in your normal life if you want to be able to keep covering war, because otherwise you just give, and then one day there's nothing left and you can't do it anymore, and you have a nervous breakdown, or you become an alcoholic, or you engage in self-destructive behavior, whatever it might be. So you really need to be proactive about your mental health and checking in with yourself and being good to yourself and talking to a therapist when it's necessary. And yeah, I think it's really important that we be able to have that conversation.
It is, and that's why we always ask those people who come and have seen these dangerous and heartbreaking things about their mental health and their experience, because we're, even me personally, I'm trying to break this taboo of we should, because especially in the Middle East, right? If you
Mm,
suffer from like mental health or anything, what do they say? They say be a man.
Hmm.
But
yeah.
what makes a man, right? Like I'm not okay, and people tend to not talk about it for some reason.
Yeah.
So I'm trying my hardest to like make it okay
Yeah.
in any way possible, even if it's with my friends through this podcast, which is why like it's important to us, because in the end of the day, we're all human, right? Whether you're a
Mhm.
news reporter or you are actually, going through whatever that was going through on in Iraq, Syria, wherever, we're all humans in the end of the day.
Yeah, of
Like
course.
Yeah,
it's not wrong to feel
true.
not right, right? Like
Um,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
On the issue of mental health, I just want to know, maybe the people who go very much to the extreme, like the
Mm.
jihadis, members of
Mm.
ISIS. What's happening in their heads? Why do they take that extreme?
So, I mean, listen, there's not one rule for all of them, or it's not like a one size fits all. And I would say my experience with jihadis is much more with Western jihadis,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because I can relate to them more in terms of like, I understand how they grew up because I grew up in a similar way or
Hmm.
whatever. So I have more of an insight into
You
their
mean like people who
mentality.
live in like Europe and America, then move to like Syria?
Yes.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like people like exactly like kids who joined ISIS from the United States or the UK. Like
Wow.
why how does that
Wait,
happen? Why does
Okay.
that happen?
that actually happens.
Oh, it happened
Th-
a lot in Syria. Yeah.
this
A
is news
lot.
to me, to be honest. I've,
Yeah.
I've
Yeah, no. So there are like thousands of foreign fighters in Syria, and many of them from the West.
Okay.
And I used to talk to quite a few of them because that's a part of my job is trying to understand this phenomenon. Why would somebody leave a nice house in London and go to Syria and join a group like ISIS? And what you find is, as I said, there is a different story for a lot of them, but some of them went because they were just so upset by what was happening with the Assad regime and all
Hmm.
these people being killed and children being killed, and they were just seeing these images over and over again and feeling so helpless and feeling that like the Muslims have been left to die by the international community, and so then they felt like they needed to go and like defend their fellow Muslims. Of course, when they got there, what happens is it's never quite what you think it's going to be. And you are very susceptible to having your brain washed when you're in a situation like that. And you're also becoming desensitized to violence because you're seeing it every day.
Mm.
And it's really easy to get radicalized in a situation like that. Now, some of them were radical before going anyway, but I often compare it to like gangs in the US in terms of the appeal it has. Sometimes people want to assume that like, oh, they join ISIS because they're psychopaths and they're evil and they want to cut off heads, and there's definitely a few of those, right?
Hmm.
No one's saying they don't exist, but far more than that, you have I would say, young men who feel like they don't have a sense of purpose, they don't have a sense of belonging, they don't have a sense of self-respect or dignity. A lot of these guys from the West had criminal backgrounds, right? And drug problems and all the rest of it. These were not good Muslims with like deep Muslim knowledge. The vast majority of them, I mean, I would talk to them and like, I mean, their knowledge of the deen was like super poor. Okay.
Yeah.
Really super poor.
Mhm.
So it wasn't about that. It's about looking for something that empowers them and gives them respect and gives them a sense of belonging and being part of this brotherhood, and all of this set to the heady sounds of nasheed, and like that can be pretty intoxicating stuff if you're living a pretty boring suburban life.
I mean, yeah, that was very well put. Like, yeah, that's pretty much it. But
Well,
the thing is, like, it still doesn't make sense to me because, like, I don't know what's fun about killing. Is there's nothing really fun. Have they been so like detached from love to the point where they don't know what's going on, or what is like?
Yeah, I think the problem
you-
is it's a slippery slope, right? So you once you killed one person, then you killed two, and then you kind of can't really go back, you know?
yeah.
And I knew one guy who I used to talk to a lot, and he wasn't with ISIS originally. And then by the time he joined ISIS, it was so hard for us to talk anymore because I was like, you really are kind of a psychopath now. I can't really have conversations with you about how it's okay to like behead Shiites or what, because it's just, I just can't. It's no longer productive, this conversation either.
Yep.
I don't feel like we're helping mankind by understanding each other better. I feel like honestly, you're at a level of cuckoo where it's like
Yeah.
nothing
You're
can
human
be done
without
for you.
humanity, basically.
Yeah, and he ended up dying. So,
I see.
I mean, I don't know what else
Yes,
anyone else was expecting, to be honest.
yeah.
Like,
Well,
you
most
went
of
down-
them did
going?
die. Most of them did die.
Is ISIS still going right now?
I mean, no, they're pretty much defeated, but
Okay.
like the seeds are always there. And this is what people are so, they have such short memories, particularly in Washington sometimes. It's like, guys, like ISIS didn't just come about because there's a bunch of lunatic Muslims who want to blow themselves
No.
up, right?
I think they were based off Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it was formed in a prison in Iraq called Camp Bucca. It was a U.S. military prison, okay? And it was the first time that the Baathists, who were a bunch of like whiskey drinking Saddam loyalists, were in the same prison as the like mutatarafin, yani, like the Al-Qaeda types, right?
Oh, wow.
And they're in the same prison. They have nothing in common except for the fact that they hate
They
America.
love killing. They hate America. They hate Shiites.
So then they start. So what do? Well, the Al-Qaeda guys are like, here's what we bring to the table, right? We're excellent terrorists. Like we blow things up, we cut heads off. And, and then the Baathists are like, here's what we bring to the table. We can have the garbage collected. We can run a state. And so the two of them join forces. And then you have, first of all, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but then you have ISIS, right?
Pretty
It wasn't
much,
just
yeah.
a terrorist group. It was a terrorist state, basically.
Yeah.
And that's what made them so dangerous.
Mhm.
And also, okay, you have to understand the Iraq background, but then you also have to understand, like, the whole reason ISIS was able to spread was because of the crazy vacuum created by the fact that Assad was able to massacre hundreds of thousands of his own people, and no one in the international community did anything about it. And so, of course, lunatics like ISIS are going to come in and fill that void and take power and take territory based on that. And that's why I always say to people, ISIS is a symptom. It's not the cause. It's a symptom of other things happening. And I think sometimes we need to like just change the framework, or at least try to think occasionally in a different way about things.
There is a theory, and we're gonna head into controversial zones now. So if you're not into conspiracies, you guys can click off the video now. But there are theories that like basically the United States government or some rich Saudis have been funding the terrorist organization. Now, I'm not saying I believe in this. I'm looking at look,
Ali.
listen.
Ali.
I'm not saying. I'm just saying that there are people
Mhm.
who do believe in that kind of stuff.
And
So,
you know, and you know why? I understand why.
Mhm.
Because if you're a normal Muslim, okay, and you know, have pride in that,
mhm,
how heartbreaking and soul destroying and mind melting is
mm,
it to see these lunatics carrying out such grotesque acts of hatred in the name of your prophet, in the name of your deen? It's like you can't
Mhm.
make sense of that. It's so
nope.
wrong, it's so evil, it's so twisted, it's so sad that of course it's natural to be like, this must be the Israelis, or it must be the Americans, or it must be, I don't know, anyone, but don't say that this is ours, right? This isn't, we don't have ownership of this. This isn't about Islam. This isn't about the Ummah. And so I understand why people come up with all sorts of conspiracy theories, because it's really painful to have to try to say, no, partly this is our problem too.
Mhm.
And partly it's the US, and but not because they're secretly funding terrorists, but because look at Iraq and you know, look at Syria. But I think that people tend to come up with conspiracy theories when it's too painful to face
Yeah.
reality.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the
By the way, I have to say, whenever you speak in Arabic, like I'm just super surprised because your pronunciation is on point.
Yeah.
I'm not used to,
No.
blue-eyed, blonde-haired people speaking my language very well. So just saying, if I do look surprised, it's because I really am, right? It's just, I don't know.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah,
Here's
well, there's also another theory that
Oh boy.
again, listen, you want to answer them, you can. You
Okay,
want us
let's
to move
hear
on,
it.
we can move on. But they say basically that okay, so most news channels are basically, like I don't want to read what's on the screen, so I'll say it, sugarcoat it away. It's bullshit,
All
right?
right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Like
Fake news, you mean?
yeah, fake
Fake
news,
Fake
news. All
news.
right.
basically.
What?
Okay.
Tell us about
So
that.
So
so here's what I think we need to like, there's two sort of elements to this,
mhm,
okay? The first is that I think we all understand in this day and age, now that we have a much wider variety of people telling stories and putting their narrative out there, and often that counters the official narrative, right? I think we all understand that people do have their own biases, right?
mhm,
And there's no such thing as like truly 100% objective reporting. Everyone is bringing something from their upbringing, their education, their background, their race, their religion, whatever it is. They're bringing some of that into their perspective and into the way they tell stories. That is absolutely the case. So, can we say that one news channel is the absolute God gospel truth? No, you're going to say, okay, this news channel is going to tell me like how the Americans see this. And this news channel is going to tell me more about how the Brits see it. And this news channel is going to tell me more about how the Iraqis see it, or whatever it might be. What is crucial, though, is that we don't undermine mainstream media to the point where we say it's all garbage. It's not garbage, okay? Because the vast majority of journalists, certainly who I know, still anchor their reporting in facts. And so even if their stories have some of their own perspective or spin on it, it's still based in fact. There are
unless
way
you're
too
Fox
many
News. No.
there are way I listen, let me tell you something actually. I worked at Fox when I started out
All
my
right.
career. I was
All right.
23 years old,
Mhm.
and the people who are in the field are also just doing their job. They're
Mhm.
telling the truth. They're telling, like, this is what happened behind me. There was a bomb, blah, blah, blah. The spin that you're referring to and the lies come from the talking heads and the spin doctors and all
I
the
see.
rest of it and the
Mhm.
anchors.
Okay.
Masters of
So,
puppets.
so
Yes.
my point being
Uh-huh.
that it is one thing to have a healthy level of not even skepticism, but understanding that, yes, this channel is going to have a little bit this bias or this perspective, right? But it is another thing to say, oh, mainstream media is nonsense. It's not. As long as we all agree to use facts as the basis of our reporting, then we cannot be putting a channel like CNN on par with a channel like Russia Today, which will just make things up,
Oh
which will
wow.
just tell like
Yeah.
absolute lies about
Mhm.
things.
Fair.
Okay.
So
Fair.
do you think the proper way to approach news and mainstream media is to take it with a grain of salt? Would you
No,
say
I would say have multiple sources for
Okay.
your news,
okay?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Don't
that's.
just watch one channel.
Mhm.
But
Definitely watch CNN, but watch the BBC too.
Yeah.
you
Watch
can't deny.
Arabia too.
Uh-huh.
And if you're a big Arabia watcher, make sure you watch Al Jazeera too
Al Jazeera.
sometimes. And if you're a big Al Jazeera watcher, make sure you watch Al Arabia sometimes.
I mean, but here, listen,
Mhm.
you can't deny that politics nowadays has more of a hand in different news segments. I'm not saying CNN, but like different other news channels that are like American based or
But
American.
here's the thing, it's like, Ali, I think it always existed, right? It's just that the difference was when I was growing up in the US, there were three white guys on three channels who came on at 6:30 p.m. and said, "This is the world according to America." And everyone in America just accepted that that was the world.
Mhm.
And that was true. And that was reality. And you know what? These men were fine journalists. I'm not trying to disparage them, but obviously their perspective was the perspective of one strata of the population. It wasn't the perspective of an African American, probably. It wasn't the perspective maybe of an Iraqi refugee. It was one perspective, but we assumed at that time in history in the US that that was just truth, right?
Wow.
And there was nothing else. Now we understand things a little differently. We have social media,
Mhm.
and we can listen to now the African American, the Iraqi refugee, and the nice middle-aged white guy. We can listen to all of them, right? And get different perspectives. As long as we're all singing from the same song sheet in terms of like what facts are and like what actually happened in terms of like this many people died and this was da 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 da. That I think is really important. I also think it's really important to have some faith in sort of institutions. Like if
Yeah.
the United Nations comes to the conclusion that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons, like I'm going to go with, yeah,
Yes.
and based on everything I've seen, yeah, I'm going to go with yes. I'm not going to go with, oh no, it was the rebels and they managed to do this and then they climbed up here and then they turned into an acrobat and then they went back. It's like, no, no.
Yeah.
Everyone
Okay.
loves
Fair.
conspiracy theories, though.
I mean, everyone does love conspiracy.
I mean, and let's face it, guys, the Middle East is like, it's the beating heart of the conspiracy theory world, right? I mean, I can't even tell
Guilty.
you. I mean, it's
Guilty.
like, and you know why? And I understand it because traditionally, like in the Middle East, especially, during like various dictatorships, you grew up, you didn't believe the official narrative because you knew it was a lie. You were never going to say that publicly, but you were skeptical about the official narrative, right?
Yeah.
And what that does is that erodes your faith in like the idea that
Yep.
there is official narrative, which means then everyone is sitting there drinking their kahwa trying to come up with other theories for like why things are happening.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
All
I
right.
mean, I read conspiracy theories all the time, but I don't believe them. I'm gonna be
That's
like
good.
super
Just for
honest with you.
entertainment.
Yeah, it's fun. Like even if I don't like,
Mhm.
there's no Illuminati and any of that stupid bullshit, but it's fun to read about, right? It's just
Sure,
really.
sure. I mean,
very
as
yeah,
long
just
as
don't
you know
confuse
it
it.
is what it is.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, it is what it is. Yeah. That's
So-
the end of the day. Yeah.
You were talking about how we know as a fact that Syria was using chemical gases against its people, right? By the UN, and that's wrong against all human rights. What happened after that?
So basically, what happened was, so President Obama had said that the use of chemical weapons would be a red line,
Okay.
meaning that if Bashar used chemical weapons against the people, that there would be some kind of hell to pay for it, basically, right?
Okay.
But the reality was that the US didn't really want to get involved in another military intervention. Iraq was obviously a disaster. Libya pretty quickly turned into a disaster. And so they were trying to look for escape routes, right? What is a way that we can get out of doing this while still preserving some integrity or saving some face? And the way they came up with it was the Russians stepped in and they were like, what if we say we'll help make sure that all the chemical weapons are taken out of the country? And the White House was like, great, perfect, solved, thank you, yes, right? And to be fair, a lot of chemical weapons were taken out of the country. Now, the problem is that if you're the United States of America and you say that there's a red line, and then someone crosses the red line and you don't really do anything to punish them,
Yeah.
what does that say about the role of the
Yes.
US in the world? What does that say about what it means when the US makes a really strong statement like this is a red line? And what we saw in Syria was that President Putin and Russia saw, and he was like, oh, wait, I don't think the Americans are going to do anything here. And he just jumped in. He was like, I'm going all in on Assad. I'm going to fly sorties for them, blow up hospitals for them, be behind them 100%, and I'm going to make them win. And what happened? They did all that, and Assad won. And so I understand why America didn't want to get involved militarily. There's plenty of sensible reasons. But what I would say America maybe, needs to be careful about or thoughtful about is, if you say Assad must go, then you probably need to do something to make him go. If you say chemical weapons are a red line, then you probably need to actually make them a red line. There needs to be some kind of matching between walking the walk and talking the talk, or talking the talk and walking the walk. And Lyndon Johnson, the former president of the US, had a great line where he was like, if you tell a man to go to hell, you best be sure that you can make him go there, right? Because otherwise you tell him to go to hell and don't do anything to, and then like it becomes dangerous for you.
Yes.
Because you've upset someone. And so yeah.
All right.
By the way, we've went way overboard our time limit.
Like, no, we're still on time, dude.
No, dude, this is an hour and a half now.
No, we've got 6 minutes left.
Don't worry about it.
Make it count.
Make it count.
Oh wow. All right. We've seen it. Yeah, we've seen it. Now we've seen it. I mean, we've talked to an Uyghur lady, and she was telling us how like millions of people in China right now are getting in concentration camps, and they're being tortured and abused. And I see it in Yemen, these issues are happening, and they're all over the world right now. In Lebanon, come on, right? Yeah. There's so much poverty and war, and why has the world turned a blind eye to China specifically? We can talk about that, because that's like where it's the most extreme right now.
So I don't think the world's totally turned a blind eye to China. I mean, people are talking about the Uyghur issue, and governments are talking about the Uyghur issue. But listen, it's really complicated because China is a superpower. It's the second largest economy in the world, right? And will be the largest in no time at all. So that means that countries like Pakistan, for example, which normally would probably be really outspoken on behalf of their Muslim brothers, are like, well, who's going to build that port for us if we come out and criticize the Chinese, and then the Chinese are not going to build it for us? So a lot of people value China too much as an investor or supporter, or whatever it might be, to be willing to really be very critical of what they're doing. And that's just
turning a blind
reality.
eye.
Yeah, that's turning a blind eye.
That's the definition of turning a blind eye.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be super honest.
There's a lot of blind eyes being turned.
Okay.
And because I just feel like no one has the appetite anymore, least of all the US these days, for intervening and getting involved in other people's problems. And, I get that. I understand that. But then I'm like, we can't have this conversation again like we did after the genocide in Rwanda, where we were all like, never again, never again. If basically it's like, yeah, it will happen again and again, but, we're just not going to do anything about it.
The thing is, when I look through history, right, Germany was superpower at the time, Nazi Germany, in World War II, and like there was a huge intervention, and like the people intervened during the Holocaust and things like that.
But they waited a really long time to do that.
I mean, the US waited a really long time. Every other country was like, oh shit, we gotta go like now, right? The US was like, okay, there we go. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and the U.S. was like that in the First World War too.
They were.
The U.S. traditionally doesn't want to get involved in other people's problems. They're far away. They're a big country. They've got their own stuff going on.
That's true.
I want to say I disagree with that.
And when they intervene,
well, no, sorry. I mean, okay, like don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it. Let's put it this way.
Yes.
Go ahead.
they will absolutely get involved when there's a strong national interest in it for them, right? When they have a strong national interest in doing so. But that is not necessarily the same as like there being a just cause.
Cool. Fair.
Fair.
And with lastly, Tom, I just want to like hear from you. What do you think? Like, so for someone like me, I'm Lebanese and I live in the States just because I can't live in Lebanon right now for my career, for my safety and security. What are the things
that makes
you
me
could
so
do?
sad.
I know. And I choose to, if I could, and if there was a way, if Lebanon was a functioning place, I would live there.
Yeah, it's a great place.
What do you recommend for like the people? I know it's hard for like people in Lebanon, people in Syria, people in the Middle East. That I know it's a tough question.
I mean, I get it. You need to,
we need,
you need to have your life, and you need to live your best life and have a career, and when you're older, provide for children and all the rest of it. I just hope that, that in the back of your mind, and it's not for me to tell you this, it's really a personal decision, but that you still want to go back to your country, you still want to serve your country, you still want to help be a part of rebuild. If there ever is political reform in Lebanon, and there is an improvement in the economic situation, and there is sort of a way forward to build a better future, then obviously people like you who have had the privilege of being educated overseas and traveling and working and have that, incredible experience and that knowledge, it would be wonderful to see people like you participating in the rebuilding at one point. I'm talking about Syria as well now, not so much Lebanon. Lebanon doesn't need to be rebuilt. Well, parts of it do now, but not in the way that Syria does. But at the same time, I totally understand that, like, you also have to live your life.
Thank you, Clarissa. I think
we have reached the time.
We have reached our time, and much pleasure to have you on the show again.
What a talk! Man.
What a
this
talk!
Was good. Yeah, like that's. I like.
Well, I'm really glad you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too.
I'm glad.
And thank you, Ali and Ali.
Yeah. Whoa, Clarissa.
Thank you, Clarissa. Well, here we go. If there's anything you would like to shout out, let the world know, you may do so now.
Get the book.
Oh yes, get the book.
Fronts.
Get the book and follow me on Instagram at Clarissa Ward CNN.
Link in the description below.
Yeah, make sure. If you learn anything from this, please make sure to share it. Right, that's how we grow.
Subscribe, like,
learn. The more people hear about this, the more we all learn about it. So
pretty much.
Awesome.
Yes, like, subscribe, share it.
This is usually how we sign out. Salute to cover the cam. Right. I have a friend who can sleep through a whole day, just gets up to either use the toilet or drink water. That's it. And goes right back to sleep. So
how? But how?
I don't know how he does it. But for me, it's because I'm super tired. So it's like 17 hours is enough.
Yeah. So few things with that. Like first, that you regularly don't have the enough hours that you need for sleep. They're just saying that it's like 4 hours. Right, and that's definitely problematic. That in a long term is problematic. Right, we said about all the consequences of that. So I'm not surprised that you get to a point that you probably need 17 hours of sleep.